All right, we're back. It is Dave, the IT guy, here on Bring Your Own Security Radio. And the name of our guest tonight, you probably already know. You've heard him on this show before. And if you live around greater Cincinnati, hell, if you live around the country, because this dude's like a traveling genius. He goes everywhere and talks about everything. So, Matt Scheurer, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Dave. It's great to be on this show as always. I'm excited to be here.
So pretty soon we're going to have to start giving you a paycheck because we call you and say, come on, get on the air with us, have some fun. But it's always fun to talk to local people for me because the greater Cincinnati area has such great IT, security, hacker-type talent doing such great work and research. It's amazing how much, people think, out in L.A. or possibly north up around San Fran or up into Seattle or some of the other tech centers, but they forget here in the Midwest, Cincinnati is like tech hub. I mean, what is that your same vision of what you think Cincinnati is about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I've seen grow really on fire. The last few months, I've really seen a big interest in it. It's been building over time, and it's pretty well exploded. In fact, you're talking about some of the local talent. I had a good friend and our Cincinnati chapter of the ISSA Vice President, Micah K. Brown, in to give a talk. I called it Level Up Meeting Night in January. He did a talk called Doing Simple at Scale, which was about how to implement the first 6 CIS controls using open source, free source, and home-built tools. So essentially free stuff to answer the first 6 CIS top 20 controls. And then Mark Jamujan with SANS. He's a SANS instructor. He also does some other things, but he gave a talk on how to save time with modern search techniques and to stop searching like it's 1999, which was cool to get some computer science in there and take advantage of multi-threaded tools and things like that to find IOCs and things of interest within log files. And I believe Mark is actually out in the Denver area, or at least will be soon, with teaching a SANS course out there. But he is local, based in Cincinnati, and he travels certainly well himself, and they're both fantastic speakers, and we had a huge crowd on hand for that. We had well over 36 people in attendance.
Well, and unfortunately, I was not one of them. I know that Mike has sent me a copy of his presentation offline so that I could play catch-up. I hate missing that security group meeting, and so for those of you that are in Cincinnati, Matt here hosts the Simpa Security Interest Group based in greater Cincinnati. I'm going to butcher this, but third Thursday of the month, starting right about 6:30. Depends on how early you can get there. But if you haven't looked up Matt or the Cincinnati Security Interest Group on the web before this episode is over, you will know exactly where to go look, because it is constantly, just like Matt was talking about, the presenters are awesome. The topics range from entry level to I need my notebook to take notes. Doesn't matter what skill set you have, you'll certainly learn something. So, before Matt's got a pretty good announcement for tonight, and I'm going to kind of hold that in our hip pocket for a minute. Matt, I briefly alluded to the fact that you're traveling and going out and speaking, and you've done quite a few different presentations around conferences that I've been to and some that I haven't. Before we get into some of the topics that you've been talking about, I'd like to kind of throw a curveball to the extent of, now that you're doing a lot of conferences, and because of this show, I've been to a lot of conferences, I'm starting to see, like you said, you kind of know people and you kind of bump into people. How hard is it to keep whatever content that you're going to try to present fresh, so that as you start bumping into the same people over and over, they still want to come see what you have to say versus, oh, I've seen that one, I'm going to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think, and I certainly do give some repeat performances of some of my talk topics, but they're generally not within the same geographic region, even if they are. Realize not everybody gets a chance to see things on the first opportunity, but usually I'm up against some really good talk topics and other speakers anywhere I go speak. So if it's something that somebody has seen before, even if they're a really good friend, I have no qualms if they go check out some other talks, particularly if they know the material I've given. So in terms of the topics, I don't know. People ask me all the time where it comes from. I think in the early days of when I took over the Simpa Security SIG group that we've talked about, I had to really struggle to come up with new interesting topic ideas because I was trying to grow the group, trying to make us prominent and bring us to the forefront. And the only way I could figure to do that was, hey, I just got to have compelling meeting topics every month. And so I think it was just the process of exercising that, and from those early times of struggling, what's going to make a good talk topic, what's going to bring people in, what's going to make people want to come back, because you're only as good as your last performance. And when you have a small group and they don't have a large sample size to go by, you can't have too many off nights or your group's just going to dissolve. And I think that those early struggles have given way to where now I have more topic ideas than I can ever possibly get to. So really it's a scheduling thing. When I have time to work on new material, I've already got several things in my head that I would love to sit down and actually do, and it's just really the struggle is finding the carve-out time to do that.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, trying to find new topics. As a visitor to your events, it always seems like it's pretty easy. So I'll give you some credit to that by making it look simple, right? Just like they do on the big stages of movies and things. You make it look effortless putting these things together. So kudos to you for that. I think that over 2020 at least, it seems like things are changing from the IT security perspective. Things like, new NIST just put out their new privacy framework a few days ago, and talking about CIS-20, and even the company I work for, we're trying to implement that. And the way some of these vulnerability companies are looking at vulnerabilities now, getting away from top 25 mentality, that sort of stuff, not wanting to call out where you work, but in the financial sector of the world that you work in, how has things changed over the last year about what maybe was important versus what's important now?
It's a great question, and it's one of those interesting things to think about. So some of the concerns are, ransomware was riding really high for a while, and then it kind of took a bit of a dip when you started seeing more crypto jacking and stuff like that. Well, now it's right back on the forefront of everybody's radar with a lot of the most recent newsworthy breaches, ransomware, and just, causing everywhere from municipalities to small businesses just folding up. Those stories are unfortunately all over the news, so those are always on the forefront of everybody's minds, very high on the radar. And then there's other things. So we've had a lot of changes within privacy laws, and data governance has now come more to the forefront as a result. So things like classifying your data, knowing where your sensitive data is, and also looking for DLP, trying to figure out where data could be leaking from. All of that stuff has now become more important, certainly within the financial sector, but I imagine a lot of other business segments as well are sort of catching up to try to meet the demands and requirements with these new privacy laws. So that's another area of focus that I think has come up more recently than in the past.
Yep, I can certainly agree with California's new CCPA laws, kind of modeled after the UK's GDPR. companies that might just have a subsidiary, I can't even talk, or an office out in California. Now all of a sudden, all these rules apply to you because you might have a salesperson out there or something along those lines. Now your entire company has to make changes that you might not have anticipated a year ago or 2 years ago. So I agree, and I also agree that I think data classification has been something that a lot of companies kind of skim over, don't realize the importance of classifying what their data means to them and how they should treat it based on what it could do to them or might not do to them. So yeah, there's all definitely good things that are changing, or not good things, but things that are changing, hopefully for the better. You mentioned the ransomware kind of spiked up, kind of went away, and kind of came back. It's funny to me, like odd sense, not in a humorous, that when ransomware really took its big hit, everybody was educate your staff, educate your staff, educate your staff. And your people are the worst channel into you. And then all this KnowBe4 and all these other companies start doing all this education, or start selling it, and people were buying it, educating the staff, and now it's coming back. And at our company that I work for, we jokingly said, hey, we did all this great training a year and a half ago. Now, 10% of our workforce is gone. So now we have 10% that's never been trained, and now they're opening up these gaps all over again. So how do you address the frequency of how you need to train your people versus, just being redundant and cumbersome? Or is it just the nature of the beast?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a balancing act. And so some of the challenges you run into are even the people that are still there, that if they haven't looked at this stuff and thought about it really hard in the last year and a half, a lot of them probably forgot some of the stuff that they learned during that training, which may have been fantastic training at the beginning, but for example, I would struggle to remember exactly what I was doing around a year and a half ago at this time. We all have busy lives, so I imagine a lot of people are in that same boat. In the user community, it's the same thing. They sort of maybe let their radar down a little bit. They get busy in their day-to-day. Things slip. I think really the best things you can do are to make sure that you're doing continuous education. And then also there are some other things such as test phishing campaigns to try to identify the folks that maybe have a little less operational security awareness and help sort of bring them up to speed and get them, looking and thinking. I know I work with an individual that does that type of work where I'm at, and has done a really good job of, sort of improving that situation at the organization I work for. And so I think those kind of things are critical and important. It's always a tough battle. You don't want to obviously beat people over the head with it, make them resentful, or go overboard on it. It's really tough to find that right balance. But I think that's sort of what you want to try to strive for, is to try to figure out what that is. And I think that things that are negative and punitive in nature of sort of, at least a lot of the talks I've sat in on and things that I've heard and read, that those tend to be a little less helpful than when there are incentive programs. And I've even sat in on talks where folks talk about gamifying their phishing things, and so they start rewarding people. Maybe it's a little gift card for, a random drawing of people who reported a test phishing email, and sort of pass those tests with flying colors. Things like that have had a track record of success where I've heard that they've been implemented. So that might be something that worth checking into or considering.
Yep, we gave out echo shows for the top 3 people to the top 3 scorers on the different security training modules. So overall, the top 3 scorers got an echo show, and then the next 10 people got $50 gift cards to a grocery chain, and other things. So yeah, we certainly have taken that approach as well to try to get people interested enough to want to at least try.
Yeah, those are good incentives.
Although I didn't win, it's one of those things it's like being Pat Sajak, man. I can spin the wheel, but I can't win any prizes, so I don't know. So let's change over. So now that we've talked about some of the things that are just kind of going on over the last year, last year you and I were at Black Hat and DEF CON together, and we get to see what different people are doing, and we ended up down for the last DerbyCon together down there, and we got to meet other people and see what was important to them. What's the kind of things that you've been going out and talking about over the last year that you felt like was important enough that you needed to teach or talk about?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've done just different things. One of the things I like to try to do is figure out creative ways to find time in the seat. I've also tried to find creative ways to get people started off in the right direction, and I've been approached a lot for career advice and so forth. So in the past year, in July in Dayton, I gave a talk called Continuous Skills Improvement for Everyone, and it was really to help people sort of find their way to that first opportunity, which is always the hardest one to get in information security. Seems like once you have that, then you can go just about wherever you want. After that, it's for individuals who might be struggling to get their first bit of experience, but also for the people that have been working in information security for a little while to continue to improve their skills and develop and stay marketable. Not just sort of rest on laurels, and be the 9-to-5er who, doesn't go to conferences or events or, really do a whole lot within the industry outside of their day-to-day. But hopefully inspire them to want to stay active and also take an active role in mentoring others. I think that really is important to maintaining a passion for what you're doing, is to share that with others. And there were some important things I tried to touch on that I don't hear talked about a lot in the industry, and things that get overlooked like soft skills and emotional intelligence quotient, EIQ, emotional intelligence, things like that, and encouraging folks to put themselves on a path to that. So that was sort of an interesting talk because it wasn't technical. There's no dazzling demos. I think most of the talks I'm known for are pretty technical and often feature live demos because I'm crazy and I do live demos. But for myself, what I've tried to, what people really seem to enjoy a lot is when they can do time in the seat type of things. So one of the ideas I came up with was sort of a plan B for my December meeting, was a password cracking workshop. And then do some schedule reshuffling for something we'll touch on a little bit later. Ended up having to sort of recast the Simpa Hackers Night schedule, which is the first Wednesday in December, and December 4th was the 20th anniversary of that. So I had this password cracking workshop for later in the month. And I tried to think, well, what's sort of related to password cracking, but not exactly the same thing. And that's when I got the idea that I should demo pass the hash attacks using Metasploit. And so it was really just working through that to build an insider threat storyboard just to kind of make it fun and light and keep people interested. And there's some over-the-top humorous elements in there, but everybody agreed in the room that the scenario I'd pitched was highly plausible. There were a lot of consultants in the room that have seen those very scenarios that I had laid out, and so it definitely was not out of the ordinary, wasn't far-fetched. And at the end, of course, was a live demo and compromising a system using pass-the-hash techniques, and then from there dumping out hashes on the other system to all of a sudden get hashes for other accounts in the environment, things like the database administrator account, which from there, if you have an environment that's vulnerable to that type of attack and you get the DPA account, at that point you pretty much have the keys to the kingdom. And it was also to demonstrate things like lateral movement and so forth. So went from that to about 2 weeks and an evening later, then actually doing the password cracking workshop, which was a ton of work to put that together. I want to say that's about the third and a half workshop I've put together. So fortunately I've gotten pretty good at it, especially compared to my first one, and pretty much pulled it off without a hitch. And for your listeners that feel like, hey, that sounds like pretty cool stuff, look into the utilities we use, which were John the Ripper, fcrackzip, Hashcat, and Hydra. That were the some of the tools we used for that. For anybody that wish they could see the Pass the Hash attack live, you can actually look on Offensive Security's website at their free Metasploit Unleashed class, and really that exercise comes right out of there. I mean, I did some customization in my demo environment that isn't in there, but otherwise it's the exact same steps.
I was just going to say it sounds a little bit like Metasploit, but the reality is that all these tools that have a lot of combined stuff, being able to learn the individual skills associated certainly makes the bigger picture much better. You know, being able to figure out if I'm doing X and I need to do Y, maybe the one tool in its entirety doesn't do the job, but it has a piece. And then I learn a piece of this other tool to do a specific task. And yeah, you might be tool hopping and or jumping from VM to VM or whatever the case might be, but if you're truly after a very specific piece of data, I mean, that just might be the only way to do it. And although I haven't seen your specific Pass the Hash presentation, having seen it within that environment, I would love to see how you kind of took it and made it your own. So I'll be looking for the replay of that one.
Yeah, we'll see if I give it somewhere. And again, that one really came straight out of the Metasploit Unleashed guide. So other than some minor customizations, it's almost verbatim, that exercise. I didn't spend a whole lot of time reinventing that wheel, but I did actually put a lot of time into building up the storyboard of a fictitious company and a fictitious villain and a not so fictitious hero of the series, somebody we personally know.
That's funny. Well, I can tell for the listeners that don't know Matt, when we were out at Black Hat and DEF CON last year, we had a private townhouse that we had rented to stay in Vegas. And Matt would get up early before going out to any of the events or any of the presentations and work on that Pass the Hash presentation actually last year out in Vegas. And when we came back at night, he'd stay up for a little bit and work on it some more. He really was kind of stressing about how well to make it. So even though he's very calmly saying that he didn't do a lot of things here and there, but he put a lot of effort into something else, I can tell you he put a lot of effort in all of it, because I watched him do it in the midst of me trying to figure out which next Cisco party to go to. He's talking about creating a presentation, so hats off to you. I don't know.
Oh, well, thanks. It's sort of funny, yeah, a lot of people had maybe a little more fun, did a little more cooler things than I did because I was off in a corner trying to build up a presentation. Actually, it wasn't the Pass the Hash one, though. It was my latest talk I've been giving called Lend Me Your IRs. And,
oh, yeah, that's right. That is. Yep, you're right.
No worries. Yeah, and if you don't mind me talking about that and what that is.
No, not at all.
Been giving that talk at a few places here and there, and it's been very well received anywhere I've been given. maybe not the places that shut down my CFP, but the conferences that didn't are definitely looking like geniuses, because it's been so well received and people have just raved about it, and I've had phenomenal feedback. So what that talk is, it's really my 3 favorite incident response and digital forensics and incident response investigations. And I call it Lend Me Your IRs just because I wanted to get a little Shakespearean with the title. And also I do ask folks at the end, hey, share your own incident response stories with me, because I love the in the trenches war stories. So I hope other people do too. But there's 3 scenarios in there. So these are live demo reenactments. And it's kind of funny because I didn't think at the time I was doing these things, hey, this would make a good talk topic someday. So I never kept any of the artifacts or whatever, but the stories stuck in my head because these weren't the day-to-day, normal script kiddie stuff or the things you see, your typical phishing campaign that just looks the same, only a little different here or there. These were the things that were a little bit out of the ordinary that I spent a little bit of time, and not that I like that the malicious threat actors out there are trying to compromise us, but, there is a little bit of, like, oh, that's kind of a clever twist I've not seen before, and I had to spend a little extra time on it than that. So the 3 scenarios, the first one is called the mystery attachment, which is about a document file, Microsoft Publisher file of all things, that was received by somebody, and then what my investigation was. And the whole idea behind the talk was that these are live demo reenactments, but they go really deep because I actually show the attack side, the code that makes them work, how they were put together, what they do, as well as the investigation side and the tools and utilities I'm doing. And it's live right in front of the audience. The second one is on security scanner evasion. And so I made my own sample phishing emails. If I had to do over again, I think I would actually have saved the artifacts from the original attacks, but not thinking at the time, hey, I might want to talk about this stuff someday. I had to kind of recreate this stuff from memory. So it was a little challenging, but, put that together to show how that worked. Some interesting stuff. And then the third scenario is called the rabbit hole, which were just the most layers of obfuscation I actually hinted at on one of your shows in the past, that sort of unraveling each stage of that to ultimately figure out what was happening. And then at the end of each scenario, I talk about what the remediation steps were to resolve those. So the next place I'm going to be giving that talk is going to be at the Ohio Information Security Conference, OISC in Dayton, Ohio, and that's going to be on March 11th. There's also a lot of other really good speakers lined up there, so anybody can make it. I highly recommend that conference. That's one of my favorites to go to, and then some of us will probably go hang out at the Troll Pub in downtown Dayton afterwards.
Is there a downtown Dayton still? Hey, those guys had a tough time between whatever economic thing, but then the tornado that came out. I mean, man, they've had a rough couple of years up there.
Yeah, it's well, and of course there was the newsworthy shooting that happened in the Oregon district, which is not too far from where the Troll Pub is, but the Oregon district is still, a great place, and it's hard, but I have a lot of friends in Dayton. I've got some connections to Dayton myself, but you still have to live your life if you want to enjoy it.
Yeah,
so
no doubt about that. Shootings happen everywhere. Military bases, U.S., outside the U.S. It's unfortunate. It's not a way of life, but it's a fact of life, is what I should say. That's too bad. Before we finish off with you, though. So we talked earlier on about that your meeting happens the third Thursday of every month. Usually you're booked up pretty far in advance. I know you've been working pretty hard. You had a guest for December. Things changed. You rebooked some other people, made it great. And then now here we are peaking at the first week of February coming up. So that means in 3 weeks is your next group meeting. So what is on the agenda for that meeting?
So as you've alluded to from an earlier announcement on your show, had to do some rescheduling. That's sort of a fact of life when you run a group like I have. I think my January meeting was like my third different set of speaker lineup. But it was a fantastic plan C. Kind of came together. So the individual that was going to be speaking at the December Hackers Night meeting had to unfortunately reschedule for reasons I can't get into without committing a minor HIPAA violation, and we don't want that on a security program, certainly. So we have him rescheduled for our February meeting, which is Thursday, February 20th, 2020. So 02-2020. 02-20-2020. I can't say that. What was that?
Did you plan that?
I didn't, actually. It's just funny how that works. A lot of zeros and twos, and I'm having a hard time saying it myself. But, yeah, it's a really good speaker. Hopefully most of your audience knows one Mr. Dave Kennedy, because that's who our speaker is, coming down from the Cleveland area. Of course, a lot of folks will know him for being a co-founder of DerbyCon and founding Trusted Sec and Binary Defense, and co-authoring penetration testing with Metasploit book, and being involved in the penetration testing execution standard and social engineering toolkit, and a whole lot of other tools and utilities. And if anybody has watched cable news in the last couple months, they've probably seen him on all sorts of channels being interviewed for information on the latest threats out there in information security. So super happy to have Dave coming in, and it seems like it's maybe one of the worst kept secrets, because I'm seeing people show up on the attendee list. I have no idea who they are, first timers, but we love those first timers. And I mean, even looking at who some of the attendees are, like, that's exciting just to be in the same room with them. Yeah, Dave Kennedy on top of that, man, I don't know how it gets any better than that. I think that bar is about as high as it can possibly go.
And that's exactly what I was trying to allude to early on about, the talent. I know I said Cincinnati, but, the reality is this region, between Ohio, Lexington, Louisville, Indianapolis, Columbus, and if we have to, we'll say Cleveland. But, the sheer amount of talent in this region in the security hacker space is unbelievable. And like you said, when you mentioned Dave's, his short resume there, the stuff that he's done already, and I guess he had some, and I have to admit that I didn't see it, but I understood he had some kind of cameo or something on Mr. Robot, or somehow his name was mentioned. Do you remember what that was? Mr.
Yes,
Robot?
so there's a scene in there where the central character is being tracked down by individuals. He sort of ducks into a conference room in the middle of a meeting, and he's dressed a little bit out of place, and since none of the meeting attendees recognize him, there's an awkward silence and staring at him. And then they try to engage with him, and he's fumbling around his phone, like, hold on, I'm finishing up this email, and sort of trying to deflect, and it's not really working. And so he says, oh, you don't remember me? I'm Dave Kennedy. We met at such and such. And so that was the Mr. Robot. And I believe Dave is a consultant for that show, actually. So they sort of did that in honor of him. It's a very good scene. I've it's been a while since I've seen it, but yeah, he's certainly very well known and respected across the industry. So when we get somebody of that caliber to come in and just hang out for us hang out with us for an evening in Cincinnati, we're definitely happy to have him.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Being able to have spoken with him last year at Black Hat, of course, and then down at DerbyCon this year, even though he was trying to put on the best one he could for his last one, he still took time out to talk to folks. And great event, good dude, great company. So not many bad things you can say to my knowledge. I guess I don't know him that well personally, but from the outside looking in, he's definitely somebody to get to know from this world anyway. So amongst many others, of course. And you've got quite a few other things coming up too. I mean, you're booked out through what, May, June, even July already, right? I mean, you've got some topics and some guests coming up that are not your standard fare. You're talking about, I know your March meeting is something that we talked about briefly already, about managing insider threats. And, of course, everybody in the security world has heard that term, but I wonder what most people have done to actually manage that threat. I wonder how many, especially like a medium-sized company that's got limited IT staff, has done or could do with the time and the resource available. So I'm looking forward to hearing how that is presented. And then I think you've got some some API security. So that's whatever, later in the year, I think May or June. That API security is such, for me, it's the area of IT security that I am probably, well, I don't want to admit being my weakest. Thankfully, I've got team members that are very strong with it that can cover that gap, so to speak. Cover my gap. Sounds like a military thing. But what is your experience with, API security? Am I just that far behind the curve, or are most people back here with me? How bad is API security overlooked, or how often, or again, did I just miss the boat?
Yeah, as I understand it, it's definitely become more of a problem of late. You're talking about trends, and I think part of the reason for that is we've seen so much stuff move to the cloud, whether you're talking about SaaS-style applications, things like that. So more and more things aren't within your own data center. So when that happens, you can only work with the data really the way it was envisioned, generally speaking, but how many times does an organization want to do something special with that data or something outside of the normal system that it's in, and they want to correlate that into other things they're doing, tie that into other things, even just maybe doing some table joins and doing some creative stuff on their database to work with that information. And so the answer has been, well, we'll give you an API, and you can use the API and set up your query and pull down your data this way, with REST calls or whatever it might be, and work with your data outside of this application or this box that we put your stuff in, use it for other purposes. And so that's been more of a demand as things have moved off-prem to be able to get that type of information or at least work with it externally. So what happens, I think, is that you get a lot of APIs created, and it's like anything. Whenever you introduce something new, the vulnerability footprint goes up, because if there's a mistake that allows somebody to get the keys to the kingdom with the standard API that's built, then, we talked about data leakage. That's one of the places where it absolutely can happen. So I think it's become a little more concerning of late. And so the topic that our second speaker is actually going to be giving changed a little bit from the initial. So he's actually one of the leads on the OWASP ESAPI, ES API. project, and so I figured the stuff he was going to talk about might be heavy towards that, but he, after talking to some other individuals that we know, decided maybe he would go a little bit different route with that. The first talk, and honestly it's a mystery speaker at this point because the individual who actually found this for me, I don't know if they're going to want to give the talk or the one developer that routinely shows up to my group's meetings are going to want to do it, and if those guys back out on me, then I'm probably just going to do it myself, which means I'm going to have to learn it. But apparently the Tiredful API, it's almost like a Metasploitable box. It's an intentionally vulnerable API that can be exploited, but it's meant to use as a training tool to understand how these attacks can work, and also to understand how the problems with it should be addressed in coding so that you don't actually have that type of stuff in production for your developers. So it's definitely an interesting topic, and it's our June meeting, which is the last meeting I have booked so far. Honestly, I've kind of turned down some interested parties for now while I try to figure out what we want to do in quarters 3 and 4, but I want to wait till we get maybe about this time in March before I start looking to book those later dates. But yeah, the insider threat, it's a vendor coming in. They've got a really cool product, and it does some really neat stuff for insider threat stuff. So I occasionally do bring in vendors because I like to know what's current and what's out there and what's available, but I really take a lot of time to filter and vet the vendors I do bring in and what they're going to talk about. And most importantly, I try to level set them with our group being a very technical InfoSec-focused group. I really want people to walk away understanding how something works. We don't want death by PowerPoint, sales, and marketing fluff. We want the meat and potatoes of why their product really is cool and what it really does to help organizations. And that's very important for my group to understand what those things are. And the rest of the time I've got some really amazing stuff coming up. We've got one of the world-leading threat researchers from a threat company that everybody would instantly recognize. They do some amazing work, and one of their threat research leads is coming in all the way from Austin, Texas, in our May meeting, and he's actually going to hold off on even sending me what the topic is going to be exactly until the evening before the day before our April meeting, so I can announce it then. That's how fresh and current they want to keep their content. Coming into Cincinnati all the way from Austin, Texas, which is another one of those tech hubs. So it's really quite a coup. It was an individual I met at the Secure West Virginia HackerCon X last year, and was telling him about my group. He wanted to come out, and that should be a fantastic meeting as well.
I think I know who you're talking about down there in Austin, and if it's who I think it is, I'll be looking forward to that as well. I can also say without any doubt in my mind that it's a good thing you are the third week of the month and not the first week, because this year Black Hat and DEF CON and Hacker Summer Camp is the first week of August. So yeah, we don't want to do anything that gets in the way of that.
Definitely not.
Possible. But for those of you who are traveling around to different cons, make sure you check out Matt up in Dayton, and then you can also check him out on Twitter and other places. Before we let Matt go, we'll make sure they mentions how to track him down. And if you do want to come in February to meet Dave Kennedy, from the sounds of it, you probably don't have much more chance to sign up, so you better hurry up and sign up before the seats are all gone. Pretty I don't want to say limited, but it is going to be a limited space if it's the usual spot, and which makes it cozy, and you're right there with everybody to just talk and enjoy the conversation. So it's a great setup to be able to not feel intimidated by others. It's a great way to to just kind of hang out and talk and learn and eat pizza or whatever. What, Matt, what, before we let you go, what is, how do I want to phrase this question? Of all the things that we've been talking about, we've kind of bumped around between like some things that have changed and some things that are totally the same. And what do you think is going to be? So, you know, at the end of 2019, we all talked about, okay, it's kind of the year of ransomware, it's the year of, you know, fake videos or deep fakes and things like that. So a lot of technology. You know, do you think with here in the U.S. that with elections coming up in November, that technology from the hacker world is going to really come into play, even if the U.S. elections are not hacked, air quotes? How much from our world do you think will end up in the political realm that the average non-tech person is going to have a hard time deciphering, you know, deep fakes or misinformation campaigns or spam, or heck, maybe you open up a political thing and you do get ransomware? I mean, do you see 2020 being a big target year, bigger than usual, or about the same?
Well, I suspect that as we bring in more technologies, more people have access to technology. I think the attack surface, you know, is there, and also the willing combatants to get in on that are probably going to show up in droves. The level of success they have is going to be dependent on, you know, just how stringent things are. It's interesting because some systems can be hacked easily if you have physical access to the system. So, you know, it's almost a low-tech physical security in some, you know, fashion that becomes important, of, you know, just making sure that no unauthorized individuals have physical access to machines or, you know, the ability to mess with them. But yeah, it's definitely going to be front and center. I don't think that's probably much question about it, at least in my mind, that it's going to be a topic of discussion. It will raise general awareness, I think, as things get reported to non-technical crowds. It'll be interesting to see sort of what individuals will digest and what their takeaways will be, or what their assumptions will be, either right or wrong. But yeah, election years always tend to bring those things up. I think looking ahead at the horizon, one of the concerns I have across the country as a whole is now we have Windows Server 2008 and Windows 7 essentially end of support, end of life, and vulnerability management is going to be pretty crucial, in my opinion, because those things are going to get targeted, and the longer those systems go unpatched, the more the vulnerabilities stack up, the more people really need to have compensating and mitigating controls if they're not in a position to upgrade wherever possible. That being said, people should definitely upgrade to supported software if they can. And I understand there are situations where that's not always going to be possible. So it's really going to take us as an industry a lot of diligence to keep an eye open for those sort of things. I do like the fact that Microsoft has historically, if something's been egregious enough, even released it out of band for an unsupported operating system. Hopefully there's nothing so egregious we see that happen. But it's certainly within the realms of possibility, and if that does happen, then people need to be ready to patch those systems if they see that type of an update out in the news. So it's a year of a lot of possibilities, and we're going to have to be on top of our games.
Yeah, no doubt. I am, in a very sick sense, I'm very kind of looking forward to seeing what happens and what opportunities for investigation and research I'll get out of the deal. So It's a little self-serving, but not that I want anything bad to happen, but on the other hand, I kind of want something cool to happen, and I don't know how to define cool, so I won't get too deep into that. But all right, before we get going here, our time's almost over. Matt, tell folks how to find either your SIG or you specifically, or however you want people to seek you out.
Sure, absolutely. So for the meetings we've talked about, if you go to meetup.com and pull up the Tech Life Cincinnati group and pull up the events page, and from there you can pull up the calendar, and every third Thursday, just click on that. You should see the Simpa Security SIG. If you're going to come to our meetings, all I ask is that you do register. Our meetings are free to attend. We just need a head count because oftentimes I'm getting a vendor to sponsor food and beverages, and we need to get an accurate head count to make sure everybody gets fed and nobody walks away hungry. So that's important, but also that's where all the individual meeting details are. So if something looks interested and you're in our area, definitely come check those out. You can follow me on Twitter at C3RKAH, and I always have my stuff posted there for the security SIG meetings, any places I'm speaking at, either locally or somewhere else around the country. Those things I tend to list out there. Pretty active on that front. You don't see a whole lot of other stuff that's not related to that on my feed. So if you like InfoSec stuff, that's really all that's out there. But yeah, go ahead and follow that and just keep an eye open. And then individually you can reach out to me as well, send me a direct message or whatever. If you want on my official groups or my group's official mailing list, be happy to do so, that kind of thing.
Awesome. And for those later down the year, if you end up out at Hacker Summer Camp, it looks like Matt and I and the official Micah Brown will be heading out to Hacker Summer Camp this year. So we look forward to seeing you all out there. There's a lot of great stuff. There's the Diana initiative that is focused on females and younger ladies to help interest them in the cybersecurity world. This year will be year 3 over at Caesars. You definitely want to check them out. Besides Las Vegas is out there during that same week. Of course, DEF CON later in the week, Black Hat early in the week. So if you want to get your security fill on, that is the place to be in the week to be there. And to be fair, there's some pretty cool parties here and there to fall into. So it's a great week, a lot of learning, stuff your brain, stuff your backpack. Come home and tell your company how everybody's getting ready to blow up. You need to change everything and have some fun with that. So, Matt, as always, buddy, I appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to seeing you.
Thanks for having me.
Since you're only right down the road, so I got to see you soon.
Sounds good. Can't wait.
All right, guys. Thanks again. This has been Bring Your Own Security Radio. I'm Dave. He's Matt. I appreciate you checking in with us this week. Next week, we'll be doing something a little uncommon for this show, and that is actually having a vendor on, which I don't do very often, but this particular vendor is new. They're not actually selling anything. They are still what they call, incognito or something business. They haven't publicly identified themselves, but the device that they're building is pretty cool. And all these kids are graduates of our local college and are making a very neat thing. So we're going to get them on and talk to them. And they're looking actually for some beta testers. So maybe you could be one of them. Maybe you're not. Anyway, Dave, Matt, Bring Your Own Security Radio. That's about it. At BYOS Radio on Twitter if you want. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.